Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and here we are with another edition of Just Thinking. Today I'm interviewing James Arena-DeRosa. James is a candidate for state representative, and our primary in the Democratic primary is in September 6th, which is the day after Labor Day and kind of a hard day to remember. So be aware that if you're going to be away, you are able to vote early or you're able to vote by mail, and you have many different options. If you need information about that, call the town clerk's office and get your facts straight about what you can do. But at any rate, we're here to interview James today about his candidacy for state representative. This is a new district: Holliston, Hopkinton, Sherburne, and 2 precincts in Millis. And I welcome you, James. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mary. Delighted to be here.
Thanks. All right, we're going to jump right in because we got a lot to talk about. So please take a couple of minutes just to tell us about yourself and why you're running.
Sure, happy to. And thank you again for the opportunity. It's so nice to be with you.
Thank you.
We have been blessed with wonderful representation here in this district. We are all going to miss Carolyn Dykema. My wife, Lena Arena-DeRosa, who many people know from running the senior center here in Holliston, she and I hosted Carolyn the very first time she ran for state rep. We had her in our home. She's done an outstanding job. We're going to miss her. It's going to be a tough act to follow. But I'm running. I've spent my career helping people meet their basic needs and also making sure that the voices of the community are heard by those in power. Talk a little bit about my background, a little bit about the position. I grew up in an activist home, was inspired by my mom. We had all kinds of activity growing up. I worked my way through Xaverian and Harvard, was trained by the farm workers in community organizing, then had a job with Oxfam, where I was the lead policy advocate before Congress and the White House and state legislatures. Was then asked to serve as the New England director for the Peace Corps, a wonderful organization that I still admire so much. And then was asked by the Obama administration to lead USDA Food and Nutrition. I had a $12 billion budget that had oversight of all the New England states. We serve 20 million Americans. One of your questions later, I'll get to some of the details of that work and how important it is to my experience. But what I'd like to add is that as much as I'm proud of my work at the national and state level, I've always been a person of the community. In my jobs that I had, sure, very comfortable working with governors and legislators and large committees and administrators, but I'm a person of the community. I served as a member of the Finance Committee here in Holliston. I chaired the local Democratic Party here in Holliston. I coached Little League Baseball. I've been a volunteer for Celebrate Holliston as long as I can remember. I also was asked when the town needed a new town administrator, was asked to serve on that committee. So I have a nice balance, I think, between local service with state service that I think would serve me well if I am the state representative for this district. I think I'd be a great partner. I mean, first and foremost, as a state rep, you are a partner to the folks who are serving as the local select board members and committee members that run the town. I want to partner with them, advocate with them. A second part of it is when you're a state legislator, at this moment in time, with this sort of right-wing leaning Supreme Court, we need to fight back against the assault on individual liberties. And so you make state policy as a state legislator. That's also going to be an important part of that role. And third, when you are a state rep, and Carolyn and others have mentioned this to me, you are that one person that people in the community can turn to when they need help navigating the bureaucracy, they need help with government. And so I intend to be full-time, to be out there, to be accessible and available to the residents of the district. I've enjoyed getting out there and meeting people, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Okay, thank you. Well, Massachusetts is in effect a one-party state because the Democrats dominate. And so among Democrats, though, you do have progressives, you have liberals, you have moderates, and so forth. Where would you put yourself on that spectrum, and why?
It's a great question. I think I'm a blend. I mean, I certainly on social issues, I lean toward the progressive part of the spectrum. I mean, right now, this right-wing assault against individual liberties, I'm going to help fight back so that women have a right to choose. I also think we have important issues related to the environment. I believe in social and economic justice for all. So I think on those issues, definitely I'm on the progressive side of the ledger. But as someone who served on a finance committee and someone who had oversight of millions of dollars in government money, I want government to be accountable. So there's a real pragmatic part of me. Common sense Democrat wasn't a choice, but I think that's part of who I am in terms of we only have so much money, and I'm worried about seniors and affordability, and what do we do about support for education. I mean, there's so many things that come up, the infrastructure issues that we have in town, and we'll get to some of those, I'm sure, in the questions. So I'd like to think I have that balance between progressive on social issues, but very pragmatic, somewhat like Bobby Kennedy, one of my heroes, who we will talk about at some other time.
All right. What committees would you like to be appointed to and why?
Yeah, so you don't get to pick, but you get to you get to say,
you get to say this is what I'd like.
Here's what I'd like. But I do think agriculture and environment. I have extensive experience in ag, and the thing about food security, it is so foundational to so many parts of our lives. And think about the groups and the people and the leaders that I've worked with in agriculture. I worked with nurses and healthcare folks. I worked with educators because of the importance of nutrition to education. I worked with farmers markets, with small business folks, with food processing. I mean, all that's part of food security. I worked with environmentalists, the use of our water, the use of our land. If you think about agriculture, and we are the 6th biggest ag state in the country, which people don't know because we have so many different crops. It's not like Iowa corn, Kansas wheat. We have lots of diversity, but it's an important part of our economy. And part of that committee deals with the environment. And we are in a crisis right now around climate change. We need to be thoughtful. We need to take action. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club and 350 Mass Action, the Upper Charles River folks. They know that I will be a champion on those issues. But we need to be smart about the way we approach it. We need to make sure that, yes, we can have these goals, but we also have to fund the transition to a clean energy around geothermal, around offshore wind and solar. If we don't make the investments, it's not going to happen. And then a second committee, just quickly, it's a little esoteric, but it's important, is bills in third reading. Because if you're on that committee, every single piece of legislation that passes the state legislature, the House of Representatives, comes through that committee. So it's that chance to have eyes and ears on something, if it's not right or what's going on, and whether it's issues around education or issues affecting seniors. I mean, you can go down the list. So that would certainly be one.
You have a chance with that one, for sure. Most people don't ask for that one, James.
But it has a lot of influence. So.
All right, so is there anything you'd like to accomplish in your first 2 years, and what would that be and why?
Sure. If I could accomplish one thing, it would be to insist that when state bodies, when executive offices, sometimes the legislature, but usually there'd be someone there, that when any of these entities are determining new state policy and regulations, that small towns have a voice in the decisions that are being made. And if there's not somebody there at the table, they invite them to participate and give their perspective. I'll give you an example. This MBTA communities mandate that many towns are facing, and all the towns around here are upset about it. And I looked through it, and I looked through the regs, and my first reaction was, oh, no small town people on this board, on this committee when it developed. No consideration for a town like Holliston that doesn't have sewers. No consideration for a town like Sherburne that doesn't have sewers or town water. And all of them have pressures on density and housing, and it does not address affordable housing, which people think it does. It's a well-intentioned, blunt instrument. But I think it would have been much better if small town representatives, either the local leaders who were here or the reps themselves, depending where the purview is, were part of that conversation. And I think that's an important tenet in all the work that I've ever done, that people that are going to be affected by laws, by regulations, have some voice as it's being sorted. And I say that because I think it's the right thing to do, but I also think you get to a better place. I think you get better results if you have that involvement.
What is it that you offer this district that is unique to you and you feel will benefit the residents of this district?
I think more than any other candidate in this race, I offer a depth of experience that's unparalleled. I've worked at the state level, I've worked at the local level, I've worked at the national level, and so many of the issues that we face as our communities are going to be determined by the interplay of all those entities. I know a lot of the people, I'm familiar with the processes, I'm ready to hit the ground running. And I also think because of the work that I have done, I have experience in almost every single area of public policy. I don't posit myself as an expert in any of them, but because of the wide breadth and the work that I've done, I've got exposure to all of them, and I might know who to talk to, who can we bring in, are we talking to this right community person, are we involving these right folks? I think that's something that'll always be part of who I am, but I think my experience offers a great advantage to the residents of this district.
You're going to share Millis with some other legislator, and I find these awkward situations myself. I think there ought to be a rule that says you can't do this, but at any rate, legislature created a district that has a small piece of Millis.
Yeah.
How do you coordinate and cooperate with that other person, whoever that is, because they're in an open district as well?
That's correct. Well, you have my vote for that rule. Even if it means the districts are slightly larger in some instances, I think it would make more sense. But I think it's going to just require a lot of dialogue and discussion, open channels. I met yesterday, happened to be met with somebody, one of the Millis Select Board members who's very supportive, but he doesn't live in the district, but I still want to be talking and engaging all the time because you're supporting and representing the town. You know, if we're lucky, and I happen to be fortunate enough to be elected, we'll end up on different committees, so there can be some cross-checking on things that come up. But yeah, I think you just, as much conversation as you can and keeping channels open.
All right, so a biggie for all of these communities is education. So let's talk about public education, your feelings about it,
Sure.
how the locals are doing, and how the state's doing.
So I think we have outstanding schools in this part of the state, in these communities. You know, when Lena and I were looking for homes because we had a growing family, we looked at Holliston and Hopkinton because we knew there were great schools here and wanted our kids to grow up in a community with great public schools. So I think the schools are doing great. I do think there are some things that the state can do where it's, I won't say falling down, but could be more supportive. And I'll point out two areas. So one of them is around state aid. So here we are where the state, we're learning, has a multi-billion-dollar surplus. And my first reaction is, how about more support? How about more state aid to local communities? We all want tax relief, but what's killing a lot of people around here is real estate taxes. It's hard to, let's put a check against that. And I'd rather give money to our local leaders and have them figure out how best to spend it rather than give me a couple dollars a week. I mean, we all want something, but
right,
you know, I just think it would be a better way to do it. More specifically, I think the state has to rethink its special ed funding approach. Now, to be clear, I support special education. I think it's important that we provide those services as a society. That's really important. But this is one of those things where we are a commonwealth. And the state sort of leaves it to the vagaries of what happens to be happening in your individual community at that point in time. And every town, they've talked to me about issues where they've had to scramble. They want to meet the needs, but they've had to scramble. They have mix and match money. I think the state should be putting in a lot more than the $200 million that they do. I think we should change the circuit breaker for special ed funding. It needs to be a more supportive environment while we continue to provide the important services that we do.
Okay, so I want to ask you a few things. I know that, you know, these are sort of quick and dirty questions.
Rapid fire ones,
Rapid fire,
sure.
okay. So how do you feel about charter schools?
Yeah, I'm not a big charter guy. Look, if parents want to do it, that's fine. I think we keep the cap where it is.
Okay. How about prayer in school?
Okay, I'm assuming you mean prayer in public school.
In public school,
we did
yes.
pray at Severian, but public schools should not sponsor religious prayer instruction. I have no problem with invocation at graduation. I'm a common sense person. I say under God when I say the Pledge of Allegiance
Right.
in public venues, but yeah.
Okay. How about banning of books?
Oh, it's. I trust our librarians and our educators to decide what books are age appropriate. There is not a role for policymakers in banning books. Let's trust the people who we've hired to do that work.
Abortion.
So this is an issue. It's probably the most personal issue that one can think of. I am appalled, and it's frightening what the Supreme Court has done. There's a lot of anger, and I can understand it. I think it is a woman's right to choose what's best for her. And this coming assault from the right wing is going to continue on. Marriage equity, environment, civil rights, you can go down the list on what they're going to do. But the legislature is going to have an important role. I will add, though, that you asked about abortion, not about Roe v. Wade. So in addition to protecting the rights and protecting providers here in Massachusetts, there are things that we could do, and the other side fights us on everything. They fight us on access to birth control. They fight us on child nutrition. They fight us on paid maternity leave. All those things would help in general. You know, we should not be telling women what to do. It's their choice on what to do. But as a society, we can offer a variety of choices. So,
climate change.
Yeah, it's the issue of our time. It's the seminal issue we have to deal. We're already behind. We have to deal more. I certainly am. I believe in the science, if that's the basic question. But I want to make sure there's a lot of grandstanding that goes on with some of the politicians. I want to make sure we make the appropriate investments that are going to get us to energy independence, that are get us to clean energy. This whole push for electrification, it's great. But right now we're burning oil to make electricity. So if we don't do the offshore wind and the geothermal and the solar, that's not really going to get us that far. So we have to make those investments.
All right, and back to children and education, parental rights in children's education.
Parents certainly have a voice in their children's education. Lena and I had a great relationship with the schools here. But we hire our teachers and our educators to run the school system. We elect a school committee that has oversight of that school system and education. Parents have lots of opportunities to get involved.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I know where you're going with it, but there are plenty of opportunities for parents to be involved in their child's education, as they should be. Yeah.
All right, so the issue of diversity is obviously very complex and touches, on gender and race and social equity and all the rest of it. How can you specifically in this district improve the understanding about diversity issues?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you see that wide approach to it, because there's so many different aspects to it. I mentioned earlier briefly I was trained by the farm workers. It was actually Cesar Chavez's son-in-law. And the lessons that I learned from them have been so important to me in my whole career, especially around diversity. And what were those lessons? Respect for everybody. That everybody in the community has a voice and a role to play in making things better. That if people are new or different or have a different way of living, we should be respectful of that as long as it's not hurting anybody else. I think those lessons have helped me in all the work that I have done. I've included it in the work that I've done. I've been blessed that I've worked with very diverse workforces in the agencies that I worked at. And yet, I consider myself a lifelong learner. I want to continue to learn. It's important as our country and world changes. I love what Diverse Holliston is doing. If I can be helpful to them in any way, I've met with them a couple times and have said, if I can help prompt dialogue. I think dialogue and discussion is the most important thing. It kind of gets you ahead of the curve. You have to talk about things before they fester, before it's a problem. And we have a tendency to often react to a bad situation rather than try to get ahead of it as you start to hear things that are going on. The thing that I say about diversity, the world's changing, the country's changing. We happen to live in a part of the country that's not particularly diverse, but any of us with children, grandchildren, you talk to them about other parts of the country, they are changing, and it at our behest, it serves our families and community well if we can do better with understanding each other. And someday, our diversity will be our greatest strength. Right now, it's still a challenge.
A challenge is a good way to put it. I do think, I noticed some statistics about this district, and it actually has had quite a shift in the last few years in terms of its demography.
It's beginning to change, and I think we'll see more of that. And I think we want to be welcoming, and we have some people formally supporting me that are from diverse backgrounds, which is wonderful. But yeah, I mean, I think we always want to be engaging and welcoming as much as we can.
So is there an issue that you think would be best served by the community joining together? Is there some one issue? We're 4 different communities.
Right.
Doesn't mean we're similar, but that doesn't mean we're carbon copies.
Sure. So it's an interesting question. I mean, here we are living, Mary, in towns where some of the lines were drawn several hundred years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And we
like
still
cows.
right. And we still operate as individual towns. There's the beginnings of cooperation in some things, which is really good. If I can prompt and support that, I certainly want to be supportive, especially if it comes to major investments that may need to be made. But I will put one issue out there that I think we could band together, if you will, to change the way the state approaches things. So all 4 communities that I hope to serve sit on pathways, commuter pathways to major, either the city of Boston or major 495 job sites. And some of our communities get 80,000 cars a day on our roads. I talked with one of the DPW directors, and we talked about Chapter 90 funding, and he said, James, the problem, right now, there is no consideration at the state level for traffic and wear and tear on the roads. You'd think that would be a common sense thing, but that's not how we do it. As a state, we look at miles of road, okay. We also look at population, and then we look at how many people work in town. So those things, what we do not do is we do not take into account traffic on the road. So we get treated, nothing against Western Mass, but we get treated like a small town in Western Mass that might be the same size, that has the same number of roadways, but doesn't have anywhere near the road traffic that we have. It gets looked at every once in a while. I would push, and I don't think it's just us. If you look at a map of Massachusetts, because I saw your question and I was kind of like, I bet the whole band is facing some of the same things. So hopefully we can get some collaboration from others as well. But I do think, issues around traffic and infrastructure, those are things that kind of cross over, as does the environment as well. So.
So what do you do if there's something that arises that affects one community in your district positively and another community negatively, and what do you do with that? How do you process that?
It's a great hypothetical. I'll call you if it comes up, because it would be fascinating to see how one would deal with it. My instinct would be to talk to as many people as I can, to learn as much as I can. At the end of the day, use my best judgment on what I think is going to help the most people, whatever town that may be. You do the best job you can, but make an informed decision, I think, is probably the most important thing when I think about those situations that may or may not arise.
Okay. Do you have bills that you'd like to file? Anything that you've already thought about that says, aha?
So I think I'm probably going to tack on to some in terms of the local aid and surplus, because I think there's just real opportunities there. But as a concept, going back to that one thing I'd like to accomplish and have the right voices involved around the table when policy decisions are made, I am going to explore a vehicle to make sure that when state agencies are making policy, they are inviting and including the right people in the discussion, not just small towns when it comes to issues like the MBTA communities or other things like that. I'll give you another example. So at some point, the state is going to do a review of how we responded to COVID. And there's already some battles going on about who's going to be around the table. Now, of course, we want the hospital executives and the people running. That's fine. I mean, they should be there. But I want to make sure the frontline healthcare workers are there, that the nurses are there, that the local public health folks who had some great beginnings of responses and then got kind of subsumed by the state. We go to all these sites that people had to drive to. The right people need to be around the table if we're going to learn the right lessons. So I think, as a concept, I'm going to try to look for vehicles to do that, but we'll always be pushing for that. And then again, I do think there'll be some specific things where there'll be bills that I would be supportive of to help more with local aid.
I'm going to guess the answer of this, but have you ever attended a legislative session in the chamber? And just describe your thoughts about that and your feelings about that.
Yeah, so the chamber's not what it looks like on, yes I have, the chamber's not what it looks like on TV. There's a lot of all this side action that goes on, people running in and out, and sometimes you see them speaking in front, but there's all this other stuff going on. Sometimes it's a full chamber, not that often. The thing to keep in mind, and you of course know this, Mary, but hopefully most of you do, most of the activity related to making policy and legislation happens outside the chamber itself. It happens in committee meetings, it happens in one-on-one discussions, it happens in dialogue, and I have experience in all those areas in prompting and promoting and supporting or challenging public policy, because it's a lot of the work that a legislator has to do. There's the formal sessions that you have, but then it's all those things that happen in the background that lead to that point.
Don't you find the chamber pretty awesome, though?
I love it. It's one of my favorite. The Massachusetts State House is a gorgeous building.
Yeah.
I'm in awe. I worked early in my career. I worked at the Secretary of State's office and was a special assistant to the Secretary. So I got to be involved in all different issues. And one of it's the tours of the State House are part of it. It's a fabulous building, fabulous chamber.
Always love it. Love
it reminds you of some of the great things we've done as a state. Not perfect. We're always learning and growing, but really proud of what we've done over the years.
Yeah, it's a great building.
For sure.
So in terms of legislation, have you testified before a legislative committee, and what was the issue on, and why, and how did that all go?
Sure. So there have been many instances where I have briefed legislative committees, especially when I was at USDA, whether it was committees around health or around education, in terms of the impact of the programs that were under my purview that I was responsible for. And so there were formal meetings, there was dialogue that went on, there were a lot of one-on-one discussions that went on. Testifying is a very formal term, and yes, I have testified. I had to hold the state of Connecticut accountable for multi-million-dollar overruns in one of the programs that I was administering at USDA. Their error rate got too high. We had to hold them accountable. And I had people investigating, a whole team working on it. I was the person who did the testimony. And we made sure that the state was held accountable. We gave them opportunities for corrective action. We worked with the governor's office, with the legislature, with the team that was administering the program. But it was an interesting challenge, but I welcomed the challenge. I mean, I thought it was really important that we said our piece and said it in a way that was strong and forceful. And I knew we had the law behind us, and it went really well. And we got a good response. It will be interesting to be on the other side where I get to ask the questions if I happen to be fortunate enough to be elected to the legislature.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure it's very different. But what are the top two issues that you think face this district as a whole?
Yeah, there are so many, but I'll put a few out.
Yep.
One of them is a growing concern about affordability. Mm-hmm. I meet senior citizens who are worried that they can't keep up with their taxes. Mm-hmm. We live in inflationary times, and their COLAs aren't keeping up with the needs that they need to be. But it's not just them. You have young people that can't afford to buy in these communities anymore. Yeah. I think that's going to change who we are. I mean, we are great communities. People are attracted to them. That's wonderful, but we also want to make them affordable. I worry. I grew up in a town, and you probably experienced this as well, where not everyone, but most of the town employees lived in the town. I think that's a good thing, at least to have a mix. I met with Chief Stone. He's like, James, my new officers can't afford to live in the town of Holliston. And it doesn't have to be everybody, but it's nice to have a mix that, people familiar, local, involved, engaged. And I think we're losing that. And so I think this question about affordability is going to be out there. And it's a state concern, of course, around housing. But I think especially these towns and this belt, because we have great schools, we've done some great things, but there's a cost to that. So I think that's certainly one area that I would pick. And the other is just challenges with infrastructure, water, and the environment. I mean, we know there's lots of pressures coming. We know we have challenges with the environment, how we handle our land, our water. I'll give you a specific example of something that's really going to be a challenge for most of the towns in the district, is this question of PFAS, the forever chemicals that sit and stay on the water. And here's an example where I think the state misstepped in the way it went forward. The state came out with new regulations a few years ago and said, no, we're changing what the levels are. Towns are going to have to now spend money to fix their wells or come up with alternatives because this is the maximum number. They went from 70 at the federal level to 20 at the state level. Meanwhile, the legislature and its task force and the meetings that they had with about how they're going to fund this problem, they finally finished their work this past spring. They're not going to have funding on the table till 24, 25, who knows when. So you've got a couple towns already, and another, I think, at least I know Hopkinton and Millicent, Sherburne soon, and probably someday Holliston, are being faced with these multi-million-dollar costs. And they don't know exactly how much money the state can provide them. Right now, the town of Hopkinton is trying to decide, do we clean up our wells or do blending or figure out how much, and they're talking up to the 40, 50 minutes. It's a lot of money. Or do we hook into the MWRA, and what's that cost to our town, and what's our options? Now, it's up to the town to decide what's best for them. But it's up to the state legislature and rep or the state government to be able to say, we want you to make an informed decision. Here's how much money will be available if you pick path A. Here's how much money will be available if you pick path B. Well, right now, they don't have that information. I don't think it's fair to the town of Hopkinton. I think that those things should be known before towns are forced to make a decision. And I think there's got to be a little more confluence between the regulators and the funders as we do these things. And time and again, you see unfunded state mandates or partially funded mandates. And I think there's got to be a better way of running things.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. So at this point in time, you get a couple minutes just to do a pitch to the voters about why they should elect you for the state representative of the 8th Middlesex District.
Terrific. Well, Mary, first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great to be able to spend some time with you. I think I offer wonderful experience to the towns in this district. I would ask the voters, I hope you've learned a little bit about what I offer the towns. You can go to jamesforstaterep.com if you want to find out a little bit more. If I am your state representative, I'm going to make my phone number and email accessible to anyone and everyone. I've already done that. I'm happy to sit down at any time. I will be a full-time representative, be available to the community whenever I can. I think the question for the voters of the district is who is best prepared to serve these towns. And I believe that with my extensive experience, I will be a great partner to the town leaders, to the local select board and school committee and finance committee members, and help them, whether it's around funding or earmarks or support for the issues that are affecting these towns. I think it will be a great asset and a great partner in that role. I also believe that I would be a champion on social justice issues. Again, the state legislature is going to have a role fighting this conservative Supreme Court. We need to make sure that we protect the rights of Massachusetts residents in the months and years to come. I'm going to protect the women's right to choose. I'm going to protect civil rights, social and economic justice, protect the environment. I mean, those are all really important roles that we're going to have to play as a state against some of what's coming with this national assault coming from the right-wing Supreme Court. But I also plan to be out there and to be available, to be accessible. I'll be that person who you can always turn to if you need help. We have great support for this campaign. I've been endorsed by nurses, by teachers, by environmentalists, by local Democrats. I'm so proud of those institutional endorsements. But more important, we have throughout the district a number of select board members, finance committee members, school committee members that have served every community in this district who are supporting my campaign. I'm really proud of that. I think they see me as someone who would be a great partner to them. But it all depends on you. I ask for your consideration. I ask for your vote. And let me just close by saying it would be an honor to serve the residents of Holliston, Hopkinton, Millis, and Sherburne. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, thank you again, James. And a reminder, I can't underscore this enough, the election is September 6th, which is right after Labor Day. Don't mess up. The most important thing is that you get out and cast your vote. And there are ample opportunities beforehand and on that day to do so. So please make sure that you do. In the meantime, I wish you a good hot day and perhaps a little break in the heat this week. Okay, talk to you next time. Thank you.